Well, now let's turn to Peter Dutton's strong remarks today. I spoke to him about the ASIO boss Mike Burgess's warning about our national security. Dutton commits the coalition to reforming the Migration Act, and he says he's concerned the government is slackening the requirements for citizenship so they can make sure more people are voting for them at the next election. Here's that interview. Peter Dutton, the Director General of ASIO, Mike Burgess, last night said that the normalisation of violent protest and intimidating behaviour lowered the threshold for provocative and potentially violent acts. He said narratives originally centred on freeing Palestine expanded to include incitements to kill the Jews. Threats transitioned from harassment and intimidation to specific targeting of Jewish communities, places of worship and prominent figures. In other words, he's saying the hate speech was tolerated and it then escalated to violent crime. Peter Dutton, this should never have been tolerated at the start.
It shouldn't, and it's a damning assessment from somebody who knows the space very well. Mike Burgess is an expert at counter-terrorism and dealing with the national security threat. He would be looking at the entire security and intelligence holdings that he's receiving, not just domestically but internationally as well. So we should take very seriously what he's saying, and it should be a light bulb moment for every Australian. Every Australian should recognise that this is a problem for them, for their kids, for their communities, not just for the Jewish community. And I think it's incumbent on every Australian to step up and heed the advice of the Director General of Security. And it's an abomination. If people don't know boundaries, and particularly given that we're dealing with people who don't adhere to what would be for many, the vast majority of Australians, as a standard of decency, they don't see life through the lens that we do. And that's why laws exist, to respond and to send a very clear message that certain behaviours are unacceptable, and that hasn't been the case. The law hasn't been enforced and there has been no deterrence, and therefore people continue to march across the red lines, and it's not something that we should tolerate.
He said the attacks have not yet plateaued, the attacks in the Jewish community, anti-Semitic attacks, and yet we just heard the Attorney-General of Australia, Mark Dreyfus, claim that TV networks, presumably ours, and newspapers, again presumably News Corps, are covering this issue for ratings or sales. What's your reaction to a comment like that when we heard the ASIO Director-General last night say that this is a grave issue?
Well, I think it's just a further blow to people within the Jewish community and decent Australians who support them, because I think the government should be speaking with those people who have been victims of the attacks, of the doxing, of the personal abuse. Speak to the parents who send their children reluctantly to childcare centres now because they're worried whether it's a place of safety or not. They're worried whether the armed guards at the school can do the work that they're required to do if there's an attack. And none of us as parents otherwise across society have to experience that whatsoever. And if the government's suggesting that somehow this is an issue that's been politicised or emphasised for political gain, I think they're completely removed from the reality and the horror that people are living. It destroys me that we have people in our country of Jewish faith or heritage who are living in fear and don't recognise this country. We're an inclusive country and we've welcomed people from every part of the world, and it's an incredible part of our fabric, and that we would treat people like this is just unbelievable.
Yeah. The Bankstown nurses video last week clearly to everyone exposed, I suppose, what we all knew already, that there is hatred towards Jews that exists quite strongly in some communities, and even by people that we've given the gift of Australian citizenship to. Do you think the Migration Act should be amended so that anti-Semitic conduct is grounds to refuse a new visa?
Yes, without question, and we've announced that we'll tighten up Section 501. I want to send a very clear message to people who hate us, hate our country, hate Jewish people, hate other segments of our society, that under a government that I lead, they'll have no place in this country.
So you will reform the Migration Act?
We will reform the migration program. When I was Immigration Minister, we deported about 6,000 people, bikies, people who had committed sexual assaults against children, people who had committed the most heinous offences. And it sent a message that if you are here as a non-citizen and you're expecting to attack or to commit an offence against an Australian citizen without consequence, that has no place in a civilised society like ours. There's no other democracy, there's no other society where the rule of law is adhered to that wouldn't be the case, and it shouldn't be remarkable that we're making that statement. And the Section 501 provisions, the character provisions, can extend to anti-Semitic conduct, and we've announced that it will be retrospective back to the 7th of October so that people know that they will be captured by the law for the actions that they're committing today and that they've committed over the course of the last 17 months.
Creative Australia, an agency that sits under Tony Burke, who's both the Home Affairs Minister and the Multicultural Affairs Minister, yet I can't find that he's actually ever been to a Jewish or Israeli function. I've asked his office on a number of occasions, can you name me one Jewish function that the Minister has attended since October 7? They claim he has, but they can't name one. His agency, Creative Australia, just as you know, selected an artist to represent our country at an international festival next year. One of his artworks was called Thank You Very Much, a video compilation of the September 11 attacks. Another one was of the slain Hezbollah leader, Hassan Nasrallah. You know, these agencies to me seem completely broken. How do you deal with something like that is getting millions of dollars in government funding?
Well, Sharri, there are obviously problems deep within the department that would approve such a grant and not raise it with the Minister as an issue of concern. And I suppose to your point, we don't know whether it has been raised and whether the government dismissed it and said that the funding was acceptable. I think they're reasonable questions for the Prime Minister to answer. And if we go a little bit further, though, my experience in government is that if the Minister has the fortitude and the leadership capacity to be able to give definite direction to the department will follow that leadership and follow that direction. It just hasn't happened from the Prime Minister down.
The bureaucracy is running the show.
To Penny Wong, to Tony Burke, to Mark Dreyfus and so on. And it has resulted in this compounding effect of hatred, red lines being crossed, as we say. And to your point, in terms of Tony Burke's diary, I mean, the reality is that Tony Burke is spending today and the rest of this week, as I understand it, conducting as many citizenship ceremonies as he can, in literally putting thousands of people through an express citizenship process so that they can vote in the election within a few weeks, which I think is quite remarkable. And I just question whether there has been any slackening of the process, whether there has been any compromise on the security checks, and whether it's in our country's best interests for people to receive citizenship before the proper security checks have been undertaken, or people have had within the Home Affairs Department the time to be able to conduct the searches that we would expect to be conducted.
Wow, that's an extraordinary allegation. So you do hold serious concerns that the Albanese government is fast-tracking citizenship?
Yes, and
for a particular cohort?
And I mean, we'd heard this, and the Daily Tally has broken that story today.
Peter Dutton, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much.